So when you hear the name Karl Marx, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Some kind of rigid, old-school ideologue? A simple economic determinist? Well, today, we're going to peel back those layers of caricature. We're going to uncover a thinker who is constantly evolving, deeply complex, and someone that a lot of people, and yeah, maybe even some textbooks, tend to miss.
A very warm welcome to all the students in my social theory course. I'm S.A. Hamid Hosseini, and I've put this explainer together specifically for you. Think of it as your guide for a really fantastic chapter on Marx by Kevin B. Anderson. The whole point here is to make the text a bit more accessible, to give you a really solid overview before you dive in and read it yourself. So, let's get into it.
We're going to tackle 5 key areas where Marx is, well, pretty often misunderstood. We'll kick things off with his philosophical method, then we'll jump into his ideas on alienation, his take on history, and his breakdown of capitalism. And we'll wrap up with a look at his surprisingly global view of class struggle. You'll see that each section is really about challenging a common myth.
First up, let's bust the myth that Marx was just a simple economic determinist. The idea that he thought everything was just mechanically driven by economics. To really see why that's not the whole story, we've got to start where Marx himself started, with the dialectical method he got from the philosopher Hegel, a method he completely turned on its head. It's so important to get this straight. Marx was not a crude materialist. That's a flat, kind of lifeless worldview. His philosophy was dialectical materialism, and that means he saw reality as being packed with contradictions, always moving, always in a state of change. In fact, thinkers like Lenin actually argued that intelligent idealism was way closer to Marx's dynamic way of thinking than that clunky, mechanical materialism ever was.
Okay, so how does this dialectic thing actually work? Well, a key idea Marx borrowed from Hegel is called the negation of the negation. Sounds complicated, right? But let's use Hegel's famous master-slave example. The first negation is something negative. A person becomes a slave and loses their freedom. But then comes the second part. Through the act of working, of laboring, the slave creates things, shapes the world, and starts to see their own power in what they've made. This leads to a new, higher self-consciousness. They've negated their powerlessness and created something positive out of a negative.
And this wasn't just some philosophical game for Marx. He took this exact tool and applied it to the real world. In his book, Capital, he frames modern history just like this. The first negation is that moment when early capitalism kicks peasants off their land and takes away their tools. The second negation? Well, that's the future revolutionary moment, when the working class gets organized, reclaims control, and builds a totally new kind of society. See? It's a dynamic process, not some rigid formula.
All right, let's move on to our second big myth, the idea that Marx's whole critique was just about abolishing private property. Anderson's reading shows us something fascinating. For Marx, private property wasn't the root cause of the problem at all. It was the symptom of something running much, much deeper. So what was that deeper problem? It's alienation. And for Marx, this wasn't just some vague feeling of being unhappy or disconnected. He identified 4 specific, intertwined forms of alienation that for him really defined life under capitalism. So first he said workers are alienated from the very things they create because those things don't belong to them. Second, they're alienated from the process of labor itself, which is often just boring and draining instead of being creative and fulfilling. That leads to a third kind, alienation from our own human nature, what he called our species being, our amazing potential to be creative. And finally, all of this works together to alienate us from each other, from other people.
And here it is. This is the crucial point that just flips the common understanding on its head. Look at the quote. Marx is arguing that private property is the result of alienated labor, not the other way around. The system of alienated work comes first, and the whole institution of private property actually grows out of that. It's a really profound shift in how you look at things.
So, if alienation is the disease, what did Marx see as the cure? Well, his idea of communism wasn't just some instant switch. He saw it as a 2-phase process. A first phase would get rid of production for profit and base pay on how much you work. But he saw that as just a temporary step. The real goal, the higher phase, was a society so incredibly productive that it could finally operate on this famous principle, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs.
This brings us to our third major misunderstanding. This idea that Marx had one single rigid timeline, that every single society had to follow, no exceptions. This is what fuels that image of Marx as a determinist. But the truth is, he was a thinker who was always revising his ideas when he encountered new evidence.
Okay, first things first, we've got to be clear on what Marx meant by materialism. As the scholar Erich Fromm points out here, it has nothing to do with greed or the idea that people are only driven by selfish economic desires. It's way more basic than that. Before you can have art or philosophy or anything else, you first have to eat, have shelter, have clothes. The way a society gets itself organized to meet those basic material needs is what Marx called its mode of production, and that's the foundation of its history.
Now, early on in their work, Marx and Engels did sketch out this sequence of production nodes, mostly based on what they saw in Western European history. It went from tribal societies to ancient slave-based ones, to feudalism, and then, of course, to capitalism. For a lot of people, this is where their understanding of Marx's view of history just stops.
But, and this is so critical, that is not where Marx himself stopped. Anderson's text makes it crystal clear that later in his life, Marx explicitly rejected this sequence as some kind of universal cookie-cutter model you could just slap onto any society. His deep dives into places like Russia and India convinced him that different societies had their own unique histories and could find their own unique paths to a post-capitalist future. He was a scientist, not a prophet.
So let's zoom in now on capitalism itself. Is it really just a system run by a few greedy people? For Marx, the answer to that was a definite no. He saw capitalism as this huge, impersonal system with its own relentless logic that forces everyone, including the capitalists, to act in certain ways.
This quote from Capital just nails that impersonal drive. Accumulation for the sake of accumulation. The whole point of the system isn't just to make things the people need, it's to fuel this never-ending cycle of growth. It's like a machine that just has to keep running, totally separate from the wants or desires of any single person.
Now, to understand this engine, we have to do a quick look at his theory of value. Any product has a use value, right? A chair is useful for sitting. It also has an exchange value, what it's worth if you trade it. But the real gas in the engine of capitalism is the hunt for surplus value. That's the value a worker produces above and beyond the cost of their own wages. And that surplus is where all profit comes from.
So how does the system maximize that surplus? Well, Marx pointed to two main strategies. The first is pretty simple: absolute surplus value. That just means making the working day longer. The second, more modern way is relative surplus value. This is about bringing in technology and machinery to make workers more productive. That way, they create the value of their wage in, say, 4 hours instead of 6, leaving more time in the day to generate that juicy surplus for the owner.
And this brings us to our final and maybe the most important section. The typical image of Marx is that he was laser-focused on the industrial working class in Europe, and that's it. But as Anderson's research shows so powerfully, Marx was deeply, deeply engaged with colonialism, with race, and with ethnicity, because he saw them as absolutely central to how global capitalism works.
Just take this incredibly powerful statement from Capital about the United States. When he was analyzing the Civil War, Marx argued that racism wasn't just some sideshow to the class struggle, it was fundamental to it. He believed slavery didn't just oppress black workers. By creating this deep racial divide, it actively held back the entire American working class, both white and black, from ever uniting to fight for their own freedom.
And he made a very similar argument about England and Ireland. He saw English colonialism in Ireland as one of the secrets to the ruling class's power back in England. By fanning the flames of hostility between English and Irish workers, the powerful could keep them both weak and divided. For Marx, the national liberation of Ireland was a precondition, a necessary first step for the liberation of the English working class. Their fights were tied together. So, the picture we get from Anderson's text isn't of some static prophet handing down commandments. It's a picture of a critical theorist who was constantly updating his work based on what was happening in the world. And that leaves us with a big question to chew on. How does meeting this more nuanced, more global Marx challenge our own views on the connections between class, race, and nation in the world today? I really hope this explainer has given you a solid foundation and made Anderson's text feel a bit more approachable. But remember, it's just a guide to get you started. It's not a substitute for actually reading the chapter for yourself. So please, dive into the text, and I am genuinely looking forward to discussing all your thoughts in class and seeing your contributions on our online Padlet.